Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we grab a whole bunch of sources on a topic and, well, we boil them down for you.
Yeah, we extract the key insights, the really important stuff, so you get a solid understanding without, drowning in details.
Think of it as your fast track to getting informed. And today, we're diving into something from 1859. Seems minor, right? An incident in the Pacific Northwest.
But it almost sparked a war, a full-blown war between Britain and the United States.
Exactly. We're talking about the Pig War. It sounds, well, a bit strange, but it's a fascinating story.
It really is. It shows how, small things can explode when there's already tension simmering underneath.
For sure. And we've got some great sources lined up. We've looked at historical accounts from historylink.org, which are super detailed.
And a bibliography from the National Park Service that pointed us to loads of research.
Plus, we even checked out a Reddit discussion, get some modern takes, some local color on it.
So our mission today is to figure out how this whole thing escalated. I mean, from a pig to a military standoff.
Yeah, what were the real roots of the problem? Who are the main players involved?
And what happened in the long run? What were the consequences? We want to unpack all that, make it engaging, easy to follow.
Okay, let's start with those roots then.
Yeah.
This wasn't just about a pig getting into someone's garden, obviously. There's a backstory.
Oh, absolutely. Decades of backstory. The pig was just, the final straw, the spark. The Pacific Northwest had been disputed territory for ages.
Between Britain and the U.S. mainly.
Well, yes, but even before them, you had European explorers poking around in the late 1700s. Russians, Spanish, British.
Right, the Spanish even named the San Juan Islands, didn't they?
They did. Isla y Archipelago de San Juan, that was their name for them. Then the Americans got involved, Captain Robert Gray, Lewis and Clark, laying their own claims.
And all these claims, European and American, they were based on this idea of discovery, right? Which kind of ignored the fact that people were already living there.
Exactly. The doctrine of discovery. It basically said whoever found the land got the right to it, sidelining the indigenous populations who'd been there for centuries. It's a key part of the context.
So fast forward a bit.
Yeah.
How did the British and American approaches to the region differ?
Well, Britain's main presence for a long time was the Hudson's Bay Company. They were all about the fur trade.
Okay.
They set up posts, generally had decent relations with the local tribes, their trading partners, and they actively discouraged settlement. Bad for the fur business, you see.
Whereas the Americans?
The Americans saw land. Land for farming, for expansion, manifest destiny and all that. Remember 54-40 fight?
Oh, yeah. That aggressive push to claim everything way up north.
Right. They wanted settlement, expansion, very different goals.
But they eventually compromised, didn't they, with the 1846 Treaty of Oregon?
They did. That treaty was meant to settle things. It drew the border along the 49th parallel for the mainland. Pretty clear there.
But not so clear around the islands.
Exactly. That's the crucial bit. The San Juan Islands sit south of the 49th, between the mainland and Vancouver Island, which the treaty gave entirely to Britain.
So what did the treaty actually say about the water boundary?
It said the line should go to the middle of the channel, which separates the continent from Vancouver's island, and then southerly through the middle of the said channel.
The channel. Singular.
Yes. But look at a map. With the islands there, you've got Haro Strait to the west, near Vancouver Island, and Rosario Strait to the east, near the mainland. Which one is the channel?
Ah, I see the problem. The U.S. figured it meant Haro Strait.
Uh-huh. The deeper, wider one seemed logical.
And the British.
They claimed Rosario Strait, closer to the mainland. Both sides thought they were right, based on that ambiguous wording.
Do we think the diplomats just missed this detail? Or did they know it was vague?
It seems likely they knew. I mean, the islands weren't unknown, but maybe they figured settling the big mainland boundary was the priority and they could sort out these little islands later.
A classic case of kicking the can down the road, maybe.
Could be. But it left this simmering dispute over who actually owned the San Juans.
Okay, so the treaty is signed, but for a while, nothing much happens on the islands themselves.
Right. For about 5 years, it's pretty quiet. Then the Hudson's Bay Company makes the first significant move.
The salmon curing station in 51.
Yeah, that was the start. But the bigger step came a couple of years later. You have to understand James Douglas.
It was important.
Hugely. Governor of British Columbia and head of the Hudson's Bay Company at Fort Victoria. He was determined, absolutely determined to keep a British foothold in the San Juans. Felt they'd already given up too much south of the 49th.
So he pushes for more presence there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He directs the setup of Bellevue Farm on San Juan Island in 1853. A sheep ranch, basically.
Managed by Charles Griffin.
That's the one, Charles John Griffin. They brought in sheep, crops, other animals, including, significantly, a certain Berkshire boar.
Ah, the pig enters the story. But even before the pig incident, things were getting tense, weren't they? Between the company and U.S. officials.
Oh, definitely, almost immediately. You had Isaac Eby, the U.S. customs collector over in Port Townsend.
What did he do?
Started coming over in 1854, demanding the Hudson's Bay Company pay U.S. customs duties on their sheep and goods. Said they were smuggling onto U.S. territory.
Which Griffin obviously disputed.
Heatedly. There were threats back and forth. Eby threatened to seize sheep. Griffin threatened to have him arrested. Nothing actually happened then, but the friction was there.
And the local county officials got involved too. Whatcom County?
Yeah, Sheriff Ellis Barnes.
Yeah.
He started demanding Whatcom County paxes from Griffin. Griffin refused, saying it was British land.
So what did Sheriff Barnes do?
He announced he'd auction off company sheep to pay the supposed tax bill.
Seriously? Did he?
He did. It was almost comical. He and some American bidders snuck onto the island at night, rounded up about 50 rams, and held this ridiculous auction on the beach after midnight.
No way.
Yes. They struggled to load 34 of them onto small boats and were confronted by Griffin and his men at dawn. The Americans waved guns around and took off with the sheep. Griffin, understandably, reported it as theft to Governor Douglas.
Wow. Okay. What was the reaction higher up in Washington, D.C.?
Well, when news of the sheep auction reached D.C., Secretary of State Marcy basically told the territorial governor, Isaac Stevens, to knock it off. Stop the confrontations until the boundary was properly sorted out.
So they tried to cool things down from the top.
They did, and funds were finally approved for that boundary commission the British had wanted years earlier.
But that commission didn't get anywhere, did it? Campbell for the U.S. and Prevost for Britain.
Total stalemate. They met starting in 1857, but couldn't agree on the San Juans. For the British, San Juan Island itself was strategically vital, so close to Victoria.
Prevost even offered a compromise, right? Giving the U.S. most islands except San Juan.
Yeah, but Campbell flatly refused.
Yeah.
So you've got the diplomatic track stalled, local tensions flaring up.
And then American settlers start showing up.
Right around 1858, 1859, maybe 20 or so guys, mostly miners, coming down after the Fraser River gold rush fizzled out.
And they weren't exactly fans of Governor Douglas.
No, they blamed him for strict British mining rules up north. Douglas, in turn, saw them as illegal squatters on British land. He even got permission to formally warn them off.
Which they ignored, presumably.
Completely. It really came down to whose law applied here, British or American. That was the fundamental clash.
And that's the tinderbox where the pig incident happens.
Precisely. June 15th, 1859. The stage is perfectly set for maximum drama over a farm animal.
Okay, take us there. Lyman Cutlar, the American settler, Charles Griffin, the Hudson's Bay guy,
Yeah.
and the pig.
Right. Cutlar's trying to farm near Bellevue Farm. Has a potato patch, but no proper fence yet. Griffin's large black Berkshire boar keeps getting in, rooting up the potatoes.
Annoying.
Very. Cutlar complains, chases it off, it keeps coming back. Then on June 15th, it's back again. Cutlar sees it, maybe hears a company herdsman laughing about it, snaps, grabs his gun, shoots the pig.
And then?
Yeah.
Does he try to hide it?
No, he goes to Griffin, tells him what happened, offers to pay. But Griffin says the boar was a prize breeder worth $100, which is a lot of money then.
Cutlar didn't agree to take it.
He offered $10, which leads to that famous, possibly slightly embellished exchange.
Your pig was eating my potatoes.
And Griffin supposedly reports, "It is up to you to keep your potatoes out of my pig." Classic.
So Cutlar refuses to pay even the $10 citing trespassing.
Yep. And Griffin says he'll bring in the British authorities.
Uh-oh. That threat was the real trigger for the other Americans, wasn't it?
Absolutely. They saw it as the British trying to impose their law on American soil. So what do? They plan a defiant 4th of July celebration.
Perfect timing.
14 American men, pretty much the whole American population there, gather at Paul Hubb's cabin. He was the deputy U.S. Customs guy, and his cabin overlooked Bellevue Farm. Very symbolic spot.
And they raise a flag.
A big American flag on a tall 55-foot pole they built. Lots of speeches, patriotic toasts. Hubbs later claimed it went up under a shower of bullets, maybe exaggerating the danger, but emotions were clearly high.
So a dead pig, a disputed flag, things are heating up fast, Enter the military.
Enter General William S. Harney, head of the Army's Department of Oregon. Bit of a firebrand, known to be anti-British.
And he just happens to be nearby.
He was doing an inspection tour on the USS Massachusetts. He actually visited Victoria, met Governor Douglas on July 8th. Weirdly, they didn't discuss the pig or the boundary. Then the next day, sailing past San Juan,
He sees the flag.
he sees the flag, orders the ship ashore. The settlers jump at the chance, tell him all their grievances about the Hudson's Bay Company, and ask for protection.
And Harney, being anti-British anyway,
Was very receptive. He'd already been hassling the Hudson's Bay Company down at Fort Vancouver. He tells the settlers to write up a formal petition asking for truce.
What's the petition they wrote? It didn't actually mention the pig or the company, did it?
Nope. Kind of cleverly, or perhaps disingenuously, the petition, drafted by Hubs and signed by Cutlar and others, asked for troops to protect them from northern Indians.
Was that a real threat at the time?
Well, there was a history of raids from groups like the Haida and Tlingit further north. Isaac Eby, the customs collector, had actually been killed in one a couple of years earlier. But
Okay.
it seems pretty likely Harney suggested this angle.
As a convenient excuse.
Probably. His own reports later focused on protecting Americans from the British, from the Hudson's Bay Company. But the Indian threat was the official justification in the petition.
Okay, so Harney gets the petition he basically asked for. What's his next move?
He acts fast. July 18th, he orders Captain George Pickett, yes, that George Pickett, future Confederate general, to take his whole infantry company from Fort Bellingham and move it to San Juan Island.
So U.S. troops land on the disputed island. How did Governor Douglas react to that?
He was furious. His first instinct: order Royal Marines to land immediately, assert British authority, counter the Americans.
But the Navy guys were less keen.
Much less keen. The Royal Navy captains in Victoria, led by Captain Geoffrey Phipps Hornby, were wary. British policy was minimum intervention. They didn't want to start a fight. Their boss, Admiral Baines, was big on de-escalation.
So they hesitated to follow Douglas's order.
They did. Hornby, in particular. He knew landing Marines could easily violate policy and spark a crisis. Douglas eventually had to revise his order, just land a small group, enough to match the Americans symbolically.
But Hornby didn't even do that.
No. In a really crucial move, Hornby decided not to land the Marines. He disobeyed the governor's direct order. Angered Douglas, sure, but it was probably the key step in preventing immediate conflict.
Wow. So the Marines show up on ships, but don't land.
They arrived August 2nd on HMS Plumper and HMS Satellite. Captain Prevost, the boundary commissioner, was captaining the Satellite. HMS Tribune was there too, Hornby's ship. So you have British warships facing Pickett's camp.
What happened when Hornby and Pickett met? Must have been tense.
Very tense. August 3rd. The three British captains meet Pickett at his camp. Hornby questions Pickett's authority, urges him to leave, says he's under orders to land Marines if the Americans don't withdraw.
And Pickett.
Pickett puts on a brave face, claims totally falsely that his orders came straight from Washington, D.C., says he'll fight any British troops who try to land. Real bravado.
Did Hornby buy it?
Hornby wasn't overly impressed by Pickett's grasp of the situation or military strategy, but he did believe Pickett wasn't bluffing, that he would fight if pushed.
So what did Hornby decide?
He told Pickett he'd land troops if necessary, but crucially, he decided to wait. Wait for Admiral Baines to return before taking any further action. Again, disobeying Douglas, choosing de-escalation.
That decision seems massive. Potentially war averting.
Absolutely. Historians think Hornby's prudence right there might have been the moment the Pig War stayed a war with only one casualty, the pig.
Okay, so things are tense but stable on the island, thanks to Hornby. What about the big picture? Washington and London.
When news finally trickled back east, yeah, there was alarm. Neither government wanted a war over this. The U.S. especially was already heading towards its own civil war.
And President Buchanan stepped in.
He sent Lieutenant General Winfield Scott, old fuss and feathers,
Yeah.
hero of the Mexican War, though getting on a bit by then,
Sent him all the way out there.
all the way from New York. His mission to negotiate a peaceful solution.
And did he succeed?
He did. Scott was a respected figure. He managed to persuade both sides to dial it way back, reduce forces on the island to just 100 men each, a token presence.
The joint occupation, basically.
Exactly. The Americans set up American camp in the south. The British established British camp up north.
And did relations between the troops improve then?
Dramatically. Once the immediate threat was gone, things got quite friendly. Accounts tell of soldiers having foot races, playing baseball, sharing drinks, socializing, much more camaraderie than conflict between the ordinary guys.
Okay, so the crisis cools down, but the core issue, who owns the islands, is still hanging there. How did that finally get settled?
Took another decade or so. It was resolved as part of the bigger Treaty of Washington in 1871. That treaty dealt with a bunch of U.S.-British issues.
And the San Juans were included.
Yep. They agreed to send the San Juan boundary question to international arbitration.
Who was the arbitrator?
Interestingly, the German Kaiser, Wilhelm I.
Germany. Why them?
While Germany was seen as a neutral, respected European power at the time, both the U.S. and Britain agreed to let him decide and abide by his ruling.
And his decision.
In 1872, Kaiser Wilhelm ruled in favor of the United States. He decided that Harrow Strait, the deeper channel the U.S. had claimed, was the intended boundary line from the 1846 treaty.
So the U.S. got the islands.
The entire archipelago. After that ruling, all the troops, British and American, were withdrawn by 1874. The joint occupation ended.
And the final casualty count remained.
1 pig. Just the one Berkshire boar. It's still incredible.
So what's the legacy today, besides a great story?
Well, there's the San Juan Island National Historical Park. It preserves both the American and British camps. You can visit them today.
And isn't that one of the few places in the U.S., outside of embassies, where the British flag, the Union Jack, is flown regularly?
That's right, at British camp. It's a symbol of that shared history and the peaceful resolution. It really highlights how something that started so absurdly could have become so serious, and how diplomacy ultimately won out.
The Reddit thread had some interesting takes, too. Someone called it the 19th century Cold War, but others corrected that, right?
Yeah, several people, especially locals or those who knew the history well, pushed back on the idea that the troops disliked each other. They stressed the friendly relations, the sports, the socializing, not quite a Cold War vibe between the soldiers themselves.
It does seem like people on the island really know this story. It's part of their identity.
Definitely. It came up a lot in the discussion. Local pride in this unique bit of history.
And someone mentioned a Hey Arnold episode.
Yes. Apparently, the cartoon did a spoof of the Pig War, which is kind of amazing, bringing this quirky historical footnote to a whole new generation.
So wrapping this up, the big takeaway seems to be small incidents can have huge potential consequences, especially when they tap into deeper tensions.
Exactly. The pig didn't cause the crisis, it revealed it. It showed how close Britain and the U.S. came to conflict over issues that had been simmering for years. History could have gone very differently.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? And here's something to mull over. Are there seemingly small disputes happening now, somewhere in the world, that might be today's pig wars?
That's a provocative thought. What local flare-ups might have unforeseen international consequences down the line? Are we paying enough attention to the small stuff?
It definitely highlights that balance between local events and global relations, and how individual choices like Captain Hornby deciding not to land those Marines can make such a massive difference.
Absolutely. We'd encourage everyone listening to look more into it. The San Juan Islands history, Cutlar, Griffin, Harney, Hornby. Their stories are fascinating. It was a truly bizarre, yet potentially world-changing moment.